Welcome to another episode of TERF Talk Downunder. I'm Stassja, and with me is Ange. Hi, Ange.
Hi, Stass. How are you?
Yeah, all right. It's a long slog, this game, isn't it? So it's been a bit of a quiet week in Australian news, but there was a story out today. So the federal government is doing their 5-year plan or whatever it is to end violence against women, and really disturbingly, I can't remember who I'm quoting here, but this was from an article in The Age. One of the key barriers identified by stakeholders was the ongoing existence of binary ways of thinking about sex and gender across key services, including housing, yada, yada, as well as a tension between mainstream women's service and services specific to the LGBTIQA+ populations. So essentially what they're looking to do is to open up all women's domestic violence, rape crisis services to men, which is infuriating, absolutely infuriating. I would encourage everyone to write to the women's ministers for state and territories, as well as federal and shadow for all of those. Write to them, maybe, tell them about what's happening in the UK with that woman who's suing the Survivors Network for admitting a man in. It's gobsmackingly stupid.
There's two sneaky ways that they do this. One is that they just demand that these orgs accept men. And the other way that they do it is they deny funding to orgs that refuse to accept men. So women are forced to go and make their own orgs, run on a smell of an oily rag, or donate their time and donate their, effort, or put women up in their own homes or whatever. I think it will more likely be big agencies that are linked to the state government that will include men, because it's state government policy. I think the smaller domestic violence organisations will be eligible for sex-based exemptions, but I also think that it will be up to women to test these rules, because I expect that some men will try and fly under the radar.
Well, this is coming from the federal level. The federal government is pushing this.
See, the thing is, you're more likely to die from domestic violence if you're in a heterosexual relationship. That's a fact. There's an epidemic of family violence. It's in Victoria, where I live. 1 in 3 women have experienced family violence. There are so many women who are homeless due to family violence at the moment. COVID, made something that was already an epidemic into something way beyond that. All the police time is taken up with family violence. Like, if we can't say, look, what frustrated me about that article is that we're always trying to get news agencies to talk about family violence in relation to sex, that women are more likely impacted, and the consequences of that on families, on school attendance, on a whole bunch of things. Now, unless we can acknowledge that most perpetrators of serious domestic violence are male and most victims are female, and deal with that, why are we saying, but then we've got to include this and then we've got to include that? Once we've got, male perpetrator, female victim, then we've got to look at, the various cultural things. We've got to look at the economic class, economic status, homelessness. There's a whole bunch of things. So why are we suddenly going, let's put the LGBT in there as well, when they already have more than adequate funding for LGBT services? Now, lesbians and bisexual women are automatically included in women's services, as are trans men.
Said that in the article, yeah.
Yeah. So,
well,
they're talking about men. They're talking about including men in the funding and everything else, but we haven't got enough funding. We haven't got enough refuges. We haven't got enough support services. And now they want to give the little tiny things that we have that are already overwhelmed, make them accessible to males.
I think what needs to happen is you have separate groups and separate services. Okay, if trans women are at extreme risk of domestic violence to the same degree as women, well, then you set up services for them that don't encroach upon women's services. And that was the case in the UK. That woman who's suing the Survivors Network, she pointed out, well, you've already got a support group that's for trans people that have experienced sexual violence. You've got a mixed sex one that's inclusive. Why can't there be one just for females? And it's the same deal here. And mate, that fucking Pride Centre in St Kilda that just won some architecture award, and Dan Andrews has been touting it as how wonderful this is. Why aren't they running support services there for LGBTQIA plus people who have experienced sexual violence or domestic violence? How much money went into building that bloody thing? It just infuriates me. The priorities are just out the window.
Well, the non-binary woman that tried to get me kicked out of my own group was kicked out of a LGB one, and then came over to ours and tried to boot me. So,
Where did she get kicked out of the other one from?
I don't know, and I'm not going to find out, but I'd love to know. But probably for being a horrible person. But we're never going to
sexual.
We're possibly, but we're not going to deny, women, however they identify, access to services. Like I work in domestic violence. We have women from all cultural backgrounds, all political affiliations. Like right-wing women, left-wing women, women who don't identify as women. Like they're all welcome, but they're all women. That's the one thing that we have in common.
Mm-hmm. Oh, mate, crazy days. What else? Geelong. So for those who don't know, Geelong is like a satellite city. It's about an hour and a half away from Melbourne. It's a fairly big, small town. And they're doing a freaking pride flag zebra crossing. And they're like asked for community consultation on where they should paint this shit. What was that?
Asking for community consultation on Facebook was a big mistake.
Look, I don't know. It's not a huge thing, but it's just that symbolism of that flag, what that flag means now. It means authoritarianism. It means the colonization of womanhood, of language. It's like I just, I'm gonna quote Kath Deves. I am triggered when I see that flag now. And not only that, it's not just the old school pride flag. It's got the trans wedge on it with this yellow intersex circle. It's just corrupt.
No, I commented on the Facebook post and said, look, I'm happy for them to have the traditional rainbow, but not that progress flag, because that's anti-women and anti-LGB, because that's how I see it.
Yeah.
Did you see the images from the UK where they hung all the pride flags and it looked like Nazi banners? It was quite chilling.
Yeah,
especially. Yeah, and intersex people have specifically asked not to be included, and yet they keep adding them to things, flags and the acronym and all sorts of things. They said, look, we're entirely different thing from gender identity and sexual orientation. We're completely separate, and we're still male or female. And the trans are like, no, you're one of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd like to know what the explanation is there for including intersex.
In this way.
What was that?
They rely on it because they're born more of the opposite sex, and intersex is proof of that in their minds.
Yeah, God. I might approach an intersex charity here in Australia. I know there's at least one. And just like suss it out, see what they actually think. So I remember on the ABC they did You Can't Ask That. They did an episode on people with intersex conditions. And they did ask them, how do you feel about being included with the LGBT? And one of the women, obviously a woman, she said, well, it's not a sexual orientation, so I don't really think it's appropriate. Spot on. Yeah, I thought I had an extra half hour. So before we came on, I was just sitting listening to Kath Deves on Feminist Current with Megan Murphy. She's doing an excellent job.
Such a shame she was edited by the Liberals, and if she'd been able to speak her mind about these issues, then there never would have been the furor that there was.
Well, she was talking about how she went on Sky News the other night and said something about men in women's prisons. And someone on the panel was like, no, that's not happening. You're just unhinged.
Yep.
You're crazy. So I've actually put in an FOI to Victorian, what do they call it? Department of Justice, I think they call it, to find out, well, how many blokes are in women's prisons here in Victoria.
And we've heard whispers that there are men in women's prison. Well, we know there are men in women's prisons, and we've heard whispers of sexual assaults and harassment and things like that. So we're just waiting to verify that before we talk about it. But yeah, it's not good. And for, a panelist to just deny, but that's quite common with people when you come at them with objective facts. They like, no, it's not happening. It can't be. Like, I get told constantly that 15-year-olds aren't having double mastectomies, and actually know a girl who had one, and people will swear black and blue that it's not happening.
It's really strange.
Yeah. Yeah.
Orwellian. It really is. So I look forward to listening to the rest of that interview.
I listened to the Giggle podcast in the car, and not because I was featured on one of them, but I listened to those because they're the perfect length of time from my house to my work. So they're my go-to. Giggle podcasts, $3 a month.
Who's been on recently?
Who was I listening to today? God, I've had a blank.
Sorry, I've put you on the spot.
I've had a blank. Yeah, no, what the latest one was a domestic violence advocate. And who was the one before that? I don't know. There's been Jester Wall. There's been a whole bunch of really interesting feminist women on there. Jasmine's been on. The girls, Sue from Animal Justice, like heaps and heaps of interesting women. And it's good because we only get to speak to people for a short period of time. And it's like, it's a longer conversation. So you get to know the people a bit better. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. The World Health Organization have released some really, again, Orwellian advice, saying that sex is not limited to male or female. It's so disturbing. It's like, okay, so, and how are you going to address female genital mutilation if you're erasing sex, you idiots?
Yeah. And babies that are dumped because they're born female and the family want a male. Yeah. And all those horrible things that happen to girls.
When they're, building public toilets in, say, rural India, are they going to be gender neutral? No. It's just so insane. And it's really, really scary that it's happening at the World Health Organization level. That is crazy.
Well, we've been told by Katerina that, you know, there's grooming going on in Aboriginal communities here in Australia with the gender stuff. So, you know, it's no surprise that these big orgs that are reliant on donations from, you know, other wealthy orgs are pushing this stuff. You know, if they want money from Big Pharma, they're going to be pushing the ideology that Big Pharma suggests. So there's no surprise to me that they're going into third world countries particularly, although I don't think they'd be as lucrative in non-Western countries because of the way the health systems are structured. But anyway.
We'll see. Very disturbing. Okay, sadly, Linda Gale will not be running again as convener for the Victorian Greens.
Did you see that horrible piece of propaganda that a trans activist has proposed for the Greens? Yeah, we found that on Twitter and I retweeted it and there was a lot of interactions. But this person has seriously put forward this proposal of language policing, thought policing, and, you know, these like rigid rules about how to address trans people. And it's just horrific. It's like some deranged teenager has written it, but they're proposing it like they're actually going to propose it and the Greens are going to have to look at it and respond to it. That's crazy.
So the aim was to ban transphobia within the group. And some of the examples that he gave for what was considered transphobia was like asking questions as a cover for your transphobia. So like banning the ability to ask questions. That was really, totalitarian. Yeah.
And the person who wrote it has a page full of pornography and offensive content and things like that. But, you know, they're considered a respectable member of the Greens as far as policy goes. So
that's interesting. I had a conversation with a detransitioner here in Melbourne. It was a great conversation, went for about an hour. He seems like a really good guy. Like I could, you know, sit down and have a beer with him and have a laugh. So we'll see if that happens eventually. But he was saying that, you know, he used to be in one of the biggest transgender Facebook groups for Melbourne, Victoria. And he saw in there this whole like comment thread of trans women talking about how there's an epidemic of women making false rape allegations against trans women. And, you know, he was really disturbed when he saw it. And anyway, look, I'll have to get him on to tell his story at some point.
I follow him on Twitter.
Yeah. Anyway, our guest has arrived. Sorry, 2 seconds. We have a man joining us again today. The second man we've ever had on the show. I must apologize because Graeme actually sent me his little bio and I don't have it open in front of me, so I can't read it out. But I do know that. Hi, Graeme. Welcome.
Hello. How are you?
Good. I'm so sorry. I don't have your little bio open in front of me. So maybe you could just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background. Sorry.
Oh, well, over the years, actually, it's not years, it's decades. Over the decades, I've been involved in comedy and speaking and writing, in advertising and marketing. And in recent times, somewhere along the way, I became interested in researching and communicating about patriarchy. And then that sort of extended in the last year or two into being interested in communicating about the effects of gender identity ideology, which is probably how I came to meet you people.
Yeah.
And so that's really part of the background as to what's led me here today. And I mean, the strange thing about patriarchy, it's one of those things a lot of people don't like to talk about it, and some people can't even spell it. And for those people watching who can't spell it, it is spelled CROCKOFSHIT, pronounced patriarchy. So it's I've always enjoyed looking at concepts in a quirky way, trying to talk about them in a quirky way. And I think if you can try to be quirky and original, then you can introduce discussions about what are very sensitive and awkward, difficult topics to talk about. And it's better to try and be creative and entertaining rather than just be like a dry lecture. People don't want to be lectured at, do they? They want to be engaged in a way which makes them sit up and take notice and want to participate in whether it's a workshop or a conference or just a conversation over a dinner table. And because there's nothing like introducing gender identity ideology to get people talking or shaming each other. That's a great way to lose friends, isn't it? Instantly.
Not long ago, I saw a woman in a Facebook group. She said she'd gone out to dinner. Someone at the dinner had asked her what she thought about males in women's sports. She gave a solid gender critical response, and it just exploded into this huge argument, and it ended up with gender criticals on one side of the table and all the trans activists on the other side of it. None of them were talking to each other. So yeah.
Oh dear, isn't it? I mean, when will it all end?
I don't know.
Will it ever end?
I'm hoping 8 years, I think.
Graeme, you and I had an interesting conversation earlier in the week. A couple of weeks ago, there was a post on the Coalition of Biological Reality page that you made. I can't remember what the tone of the post was, but somehow there was a discussion from women about how they can get men to understand their interest in this problem.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
And we had a conversation about that. My response was, well, I don't give a shit what men think. But there were so many women who were worried or concerned or, just beside themselves because they didn't feel supported by their male significant others. Has Graeme frozen?
Oh, can you
hear me, Graeme?
No, I think you froze there for a second, perhaps sorry. I froze.
We both did.
I was pretending not to freeze, but perhaps I did.
Yeah, I was just saying how on that Facebook thread, there were some women who were deeply distressed about this issue not being important enough to their male significant others.
What's your advice?
Yeah.
Well, yes, that I think one of the important things there is to if anyone wants to start a conversation with a bloke about these matters, a good thing to be thinking about first is, what is the entry point into the conversation? How do you start the conversation as opposed to just ranting? I mean, there can be a temptation to just start ranting about something. That may not work. But look, if the guy is interested in politics, for example, that could be an entry point. Interested in politics, so your entry point could be via that "what is a woman" question that's going around, being asked of political candidates, and now is featuring with their trying to come up with a new prime minister in England. Those issues are taking prominent place. If the bloke's a lawyer, your entry point to the conversation could be about these new laws for self-ID and conversion therapy. So you come at it from a legal angle, because that's where the guy's interests lie. Same with if he's in business or in the corporate world, you could start off by discussing that notion of go woke, go broke, or what do you think identity politics does to the culture of an organisation? And if the bloke is already involved in corporate, then he's probably going to be interested in that and concerned about it and affected by it if there is a whole lot of woke stuff going on. So that can be, I mean, if he loves music, you could talk about your favourite gender diverse songs, such as Bruce Springsteen's song, of course, Born in the Wrong Body. There's Tammy Wynette's song, Stand By Your Tran. And of course, who could forget Pink Floyd's classic, Another Fellow Plasty in the Wall. There's all sorts of things. I mean, if he's interested in sport, you could start off talking about you probably don't know about this. There's a forthcoming tour by the Pakistani transgender cricket team. You could talk about some of the star players in that team. The best batsman being, his name is Kudabina Gurley, and the best bowler's called Look at My Lady Dick. So there's all sorts of ways, and of course then there's the champion wicketkeeper. He could be a wicket creeper. I think some of them are, especially the champion wicket creeper is his name is I've actually misgendered him, haven't I? But his name's Not a Woman's Arsehole. So there's lots of ways to introduce the topic of and that's an important thing. How do you get it? How do you start off the conversation in a way that's relevant to the guy? I mean, another way, and I think we had a little chat about this the other day too, was Ange, was you can, another way into it without you having to carry a lot of that initial conversation is if you know that this man likes Jordan Peterson, for example, you can just show him a relevant clip of Jordan Peterson making a strong point about the absurdity of queer theory. You're going to, what you're doing is you're using his respect for Jordan Peterson as a Trojan horse for the message you want to convey, and then you take it from there. Or if you have a conservative father, say, who was a fan of the former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, John Anderson, you could show him a clip of Anderson when he interviewed Abigail Schreier about the way social contagion is influencing girls. So what you're doing there is it's something, you can sum it up as this way. It's called market what's already marketed. The idea of like the fame surrounding Jordan Peterson or John Anderson is already there. So you're piggybacking off that. And look, where that originated from, just to digress a fraction, was, I think it was, I first heard Andy Warhol, the artist, talk about that a long time ago. And he said that the trick was to market what's already marketed. And he had these iconic artworks of Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe. And the aura around Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe had already been created and marketed to the public by others and paid for by others. So Andy Warhol just had to piggyback off that. And you can imagine if he tried to create the same type of artworks about two unknowns, just no interest. So you take something that's already there and you attach it to it. And unfortunately, that's in a sense what the trans and queer people did. They took something that was already marketed, which was the gay.
Oh, bad for a moment. That sucks.
Way they didn't have to start from scratch. But the basic principle is there.
Let me ask, was there a peak trans moment for you, a moment where you were just like, what is going on, that got you into this, or something else?
I can't really think of an exact moment. Or what I do know is that when I was doing some research into patriarchy a few years ago, none of this was on the radar whatsoever. I was reading, in order to research into patriarchy, you're reading all sorts of stuff by different feminists and so on, by Bell Hooks and Gloria Steinem and all these others, a lot of radical feminists and so on. You're reading all this stuff, but there was nothing at all about this topic. It just seemed to burst forth out of nowhere. I first became more conscious of what you might call woke ideology by hearing more about critical race theory, that side of it. And then in starting to hear about that, I started to hear about the gender identity ideology. And I thought, what on earth is this?
Mm-hmm. It's just...
And so look, I mean, in starting to explore this stuff, I'm trying to look at some of the concepts around that in a quirky way. And I mean, I've started working on a little poem looking at some of this stuff, and looking at it in this particular poem. I'll just read you a couple of verses. I'm looking at it from the point of view of a bloke, from a bloke.
A cishet white bloke.
Yeah, could be. Doesn't have to be white, but he's probably he's cis. Oh,
yeah.
Cis.
Sorry. It's frozen on his exasperation.
I don't blame him. No.
Oh, Graeme, can you hear us? You've like badly frozen. You might.
What's that?
Oh, you were badly frozen. Yeah. Okay,
I'll just hang on. I can just switch over. Just bear with me for a sec. I'll
switch to audio.
Network that I can attach to, which hopefully will be better. Is that better at all?
For now, yeah. Let's run with it. Yeah.
Better for now. So yeah, there's this little poem. So it goes like this. Hey fellas, have you heard the news? We can now go into the ladies' loos, indulge our fetishes more and more. It's now our right because they've passed a law. Boys do it for a joke. As lads, we thought it funny to make a young girl squirm as she came out of the dunny. But now as men, we walk right in. Being near them's what we crave. Thanks to self-ID, we're praised as stunning and brave. Now that we're allowed to enter a woman's space, it's going to make it easier to keep her in her place. Changing rooms no longer segregated by sex certainly makes it easier these days to stalk your ex. So you can see what I'm trying to get at there. That sort of thing I would use as a discussion starter. It's just a different way of, you can have somebody read that. If you had a room full of people, of tables of people, mixed tables of men and women, and you wanted to start discussions around this, you can read out a little thing like that, and you can start to sort of look at it, break it down, and ask people, what do you relate to in that, and what do you think of that? Some people who don't know much about this might say, "Oh, that can't be true. That can't be true. Blokes can't just walk into them." And then, of course, you say, "Well, yes, they can."
Yeah. I just shared a picture of some man washing his hands like just looks like a man. He's not dressed as a woman or anything like that. Just washing his hands in the women's toilets. And some woman has, you know, surreptitiously taken a photo of him. And she said, you know, I was not comfortable going and confronting him, and neither were any of the other women that were in the toilets there. So, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Let alone, of course, let alone a young teenage girl who's just coming to grips with what it means to pass through puberty and having their first period and this sort of thing. I mean, I'm well aware that there's a whole raft of reasons other than basic safety that revolve around dignity and comfort and privacy that girls and women need. And they need to be able to support each other in an environment without any male presence.
Well, thank you, Graeme, because one of my criticisms I have about most of the men that commentate on this issue is that they're concerned with issues of fairness, particularly with sport. And it's refreshing to hear a man acknowledge the privacy, safety and dignity aspect of it, because for me personally, that is the most important thing. You know, the fairness of a man participating in sport. Yes, it's awful that a woman may be harmed physically, but I'm more concerned about the invasion of her privacy and her dignity. So it's nice to have it acknowledged. Why do you think men are so reluctant to speak out about that?
Well, I don't really know the answer to that question, but that gets back to how do we make men want to engage in this and speak out about it? And I think one thing is to try and make these issues personal for the man, in the sense that you're trying to convey to a given man, depending on his circumstances, you're trying to say, well, you're trying to get him to think that an attack, or when I say attack, I don't just necessarily mean a physical attack, but some sort of let's say an attack on the rights of my daughter or mother or sister or partner is an attack on me. To make the guy see it as an affront to him.
A couple of ideas I had was, one would be to say to a man, well, how would you feel if a teenage girl walked into the men's change rooms and stripped down naked and said, well, she's allowed to be there because she's a trans man? That was one. And then also, well, how would you feel if a man with breasts stripped down naked in your change rooms? So he's got breasts and male genitalia. How would you feel? Now, can you transfer that to how women would feel, given that there is that extra threat of being assaulted, sexually assaulted, or it just being a power move on his part to get his dick out in the women's? What do you think of those takes?
Yeah, well, that could be a way to. I think you've got to be able to try and get the bloke to empathise with the situation and understand the perspective from the point of view of a woman. And something that I'm always saying is, whether it's sport or any of the single sex spaces or services, it's not about whether only a small number of men are going to cause a problem or something. That I'm not interested in getting to that point. I think it's just the basic level of consent and boundaries. As far as I'm concerned, women have the right to have, as do men, to have personal boundaries around them relating to themselves as a member of this sex class or that sex class. That's it. We're not interested in the amount of like with sport, not interested in the amount of testosterone or anything like that. It's no, women say no. Like, this is it's a breach of boundaries and a breach of consent. And that's where the battle ultimately has to be fought, I think. It's, yeah.
You're quite prolific on Twitter. How's that going? And you mentioned, you know, some of your tweets have been quite popular and gotten really overwhelming response. So what's that been
Yeah,
like?
it's good. That relates to something I was going to mention too, is that, I mean, I enjoy coming up with tweets. I think I enjoy there's obviously a discipline in doing it because it's a really short little thing. It's much easier to come up with a rambling Facebook post than it is a tweet because you're confined to it. And I mean, that can be a good thing, because if you can come up with something that's memorable and interesting and influential, and that can then be shared, you know, retweeted hundreds or thousands of times quite quickly, then that's a good thing. And there's something that I've always tried to do, which actually my wife came up with this phrase, which was fun and doable. Wherever possible, try to make things fun and doable. Obviously, whatever the task is or the goal is, if it's too big, it's not doable. I mean, a tweet is doable. It's a short little thing. And if you make it fun to come up with it, with the stuff, then you're motivated to start. I mean, if you can't get a sense of fun or enjoyment out of what we're doing, even though we have a very serious ultimate end game, if you can't have some fun along the way, then you become demoralized. So it's important for us all to have fun individually as well as together. I mean, an example is not long ago, there was somebody had this little article or something, one of these woke activists, and they referred to women as a womb carrier, as womb carriers. And then all these people started taking the piss out of it on Twitter. So I thought, you know, fun and doable. So, okay, I'm going to have a go here. My little tweet was about this, if a womb carrier travels by plane, should the womb be checked in as baggage, or can it be taken on board and placed in the overhead locker? And other people were coming up with all sorts of stuff too. And everyone's having fun, because look, a lot of this stuff is so ridiculous that it has to be ridiculed. You can't take it seriously. It's also, you can convey a lot in one tweet. People think, oh, that's just such a tiny thing, but you can convey a lot in one tweet. And probably one tweet that I have, which I put out now and again, does have quite a lot in it. It has 4 distinct statements. And so the tweet reads, women's sport is not a dumping ground for weak men. Womanhood is not a happy pill for sick men. Female spaces are not playpens for adult males who never grew up. Women are not human shields for males who are scared of other men. Now that all fits into one tweet. It says a fair bit, and I think it's a good thing for all of us to be trying to come up with tiny little ways of expressing stuff. And look, even if we want to actually write a whole article or come up with a big 30-minute or 60-minute presentation for whatever reason, it's good to start with like little chapter headings. And if each of those chapter headings is like a tweet, then you can end up sharing those things. And then you start with each little tweet and you expand the guts of the tweet into this segment. It's always better to start with your core message and then expand it, rather than start with all this stuff that you've got and then try to condense it. Better to start with a tiny message and then stay true to that message by expanding on it bit by bit by bit. So that's what I've always found worked for me in the past. I mean, another little tweet that I have is actually one that relates to the cis thing is that we talked about before. Is this tweet reads, there are no subgroups of women called cis and trans, just women and men who no longer want to be men. It's like a giraffe wanting to be a rabbit and saying that there are two subgroups of rabbits, short-necked and long-necked. No, there aren't. Just rabbits and just women.
Yeah.
So that's a tweet. That's a tweet. We're trying to come up with a like the analogy, some quirky thing like the giraffe thing and the rabbit thing, and you're trying to with every form of communication, we're trying to create aha moments, so that perhaps they're either hearing something that they haven't heard before, or they're hearing the same message but in a different way. That's the important thing. Look, one more tweet here is the I was trying to come up with something. Again, there is an analogy in there. The tweet reads, like an onion, queer theory is made up of layers. And after you peel off the manipulative outer layers of be kind and inclusion, you will always arrive at the same three inner layers: misogyny, male sexual arousal, and access to children. So the point is, that can be a discussion starter, and it fits on a whiteboard, or it fits on a little handout, or it fits on a PowerPoint slide, and you can kick off a whole discussion with that. And I think that's an effective way to do it. Look, another one is a couple of other ones that I've got here, which do the rounds from time to time and really resonate with people. Is one is the trans-related abuse of girls follows the 4M model of misogyny, medication, mutilation, manipulation. A hateful chemical and surgical act of violence on girls' bodies, often using experimental, irreversible methods, and dishonest manipulation of public discourse on the topic. So I'll quote tweet something else, something new that's really important that might have been put out by Kathleen Stock or Maya Forstater or somebody, or you guys, whatever it is, or Holly Lawford Smith. She's banned from Twitter, isn't she? Yeah. I don't know. Who isn't banned? I'll be banned tomorrow from everything. But sometimes you retweet something and you put that as a quote tweet. You might put that, or I might put it just as a reply to somebody else's tweet. And I mean, a good thing is to just build up a little collection of them all in the one place, so you can pull them out. And look, I think there's a huge movement building, mainly driven by women, clearly, in this, and that relates to a tweet that I sometimes put out, which is the mightiest force defending kids against toxic gender ideology will consist of millions of mothers and grandmothers who will not be silenced. Activists have stepped between a lioness and her cubs. There is no more dangerous place to be.
Oh, look, it's got to end at some point. And yeah, spot on. Women are never going to stop fighting this. Even if they just continue trying to push it and continue trying to get laws changed in their favour, even if it takes 20 years, we're still going to be fighting it, I think. Yeah.
I mean, do they really think, do these activists, does the trans-industrial complex, do they really think, does Stonewall and Acon and all those, do they really think that they're going to end up fining the whole lot of us $100,000 or putting us in jail for 10 years? The only way for them to ultimately win is to turn the country into a police state.
Yeah. Well, I think if Labor gets voted in again here in Victoria towards the end of this year, one of their plans is to push through new hate speech laws. And on the list, women were listed as a protected class. And, it just makes me think, well, what are male comedians going to make jokes of, like it's going to kill comedy. It really is.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So, anyway.
But look, you try to, it's not always, for me, when I'm giving a presentation or something, it's not always about trying to be funny, or I use the word quirky a lot, quirky and unusual. You're trying to be original because you just can't say the same thing again and again and again, but you're trying to be original. I mean, here's another little poem that I've got. It's not focused specifically on gender identity ideology, but it is focused on when I want to again start a discussion about patriarchy. So it goes like this: even in Australia, a newborn's genitalia can determine the type of life that it might lead. For a girl, there's meek submission, but a boy may have permission to live a life of power, lust and greed. Some say wearing pink assumes you cannot think, which means you'll always travel second class. And I somehow have the feeling that even beneath that glassy ceiling, there are many doors through which you'll never pass. But if you sell your soul and play a patriarchal role, you can ruthlessly exploit both man and beast, just as if you had the totem that sits above the scrotum, like a distinguished politician, prince or priest.
Excellent.
So you have fun and doable. If I can advise people who are watching one or two things, it's you write down that phrase, fun and doable. Let's try to make this stuff fun and doable, try and market what's already marketed. It's good to have a few little solid principles of communication that you keep coming back to.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Graeme. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And thanks for being on side. We appreciate it. We really do.
Yeah. Finally, when will it all end?
Yeah. Well, what's your prediction? I give it 8 years.
I'd know bits and pieces of it'll end. Sometimes some people have described it, the whole thing, as like a house of cards.
Yeah.
And then you if you can bring down the bottom card, then it all falls down. But it doesn't seem to be happening that way. I think it's more like a solid rock, and we have to look for the little cracks, and we drive wedges into all the different little cracks. Some are legal, like legal, political, educational, health related, all these different little cracks in different areas, and you keep driving them in with the truth, and eventually the rock might split open. I like analogies.
We'll see. All right.
Okay.
Cheers, Graeme.
Right. Catch you later.
See ya. Bye.
See ya.
There we go.
As I was driving home today, I saw a couple of wedge-tailed eagles flying around, and they're huge, like they're 2 metre, wingspan on them. And then I saw this family of magpies go shooting up from some gum trees and shoo them out of the area. So these 2 massive birds, and then these 4 comparatively tiny little magpies just shooed them away. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, we've got to not underestimate ourselves. I'm short, I'm nobody, and I've achieved some things in my life against the odds. And I like to think that there are a lot of people like me out there, that it might look, it's like playing a video game and the big gender Borg is the final boss. You know, you just got to keep going back and throwing everything you can at it, you know, and the odds might be against you, but you will get there. You just got to keep going. And that's how I look at it. But, you know, I was quite buoyed by those little magpies. I was like, yes.
Fine, an omen.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's your prediction? How long do you think it'll take?
Well, I think the seeds of doubt are really starting. You know, people are noticing that this has gone over the top. Even, you know, your most well, I noticed when one of the real leftists that I know, he's a bit of an a-hole, he took the pronouns out of his bio about a year ago, and I went,
Right, interesting.
So I think that there, and you know, and little conversations that I've had with some prominent people, journalists, politicians, where they're starting to really see the red flags.
Okay.
And so I'm thinking, well, if senior journalists are complaining that they're not able to report objectively on this issue, something's going to have to give.
Mm-hmm.
And I think within about 5 years, but I also think because of the social contagion aspect, it'll be a couple of years. Remember, it was, you know, 5-10 years ago that everyone was getting full sleeve tattoos.
Yeah.
And now everyone's going, oh, full sleeves, that was so 10 years ago. And all us clean skins like me all predicted it, right? But that's how social contagions work.
Yeah.
So I think there will be a natural, less kids will get involved because it won't be cool. There still will be children who are groomed into it. But yeah, I think that adolescent thing that we're noticing, I think may temper a bit. And particularly as news overseas comes out about the dangers of puberty blockers and things like that. You know, we're going to see more and more detransitioners and people talking about the impact of this medication on them. You know, I'm thinking, yeah, if it's a house of cards, there's a bit of a rumble, you know.
I wonder if I still think detransitioners have unfortunately a huge part to play in this, and we need more of them to go public. Yeah, especially.
And we need a person, you know, on the left here in Australia to speak up against this.
Yes.
You know, we need a public figure who is respected. There's a few that could get away with it. Someone like Sean McAuliffe, for example. You know, there's a few female commentators that could possibly get away with it too, but they're not doing it. And the thing is that we know when the media are plugging all this trans stuff, we can see that they're being insincere. Like when the project had that they them on, and you could see the commentators are all just sort of like really awkward. You know, we know that they don't believe this bullshit, and people aren't stupid.
Yeah. You
know, so yeah, I think also the more people, like I've had an increase in the last 12 months of people contacting me saying there's a person in my workplace, there's a child at my kid's school, 6 kids in my kid's grade are now non-binary. So the more saturated it gets, the more people are going to go, whoa, what's happening here?
Yeah.
You know, everyone's cool with non-binary until they start talking medication and breast binding and surgery and blah, blah, blah.
Or not wanting to use the women's toilet, or wanting to use the women's toilets, whichever one.
Well, we need to put AGPs out in the public eye, because after Insight, a whole bunch of people were peaked. So the more that they, the more trans people that get like media on the media, the better it is, because people can see that we're not talking about passing trans women impacting women-only services. We're talking about AGPs. Well, and the more people that wake up to that, the better.
Yeah, look, the autogynephile angle, like I haven't even seen it really covered in the UK media. Like the UK media won't even go there. So that's a really hard one. I think, you know, for us it's so obvious, and it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like must be huge numbers of men transitioning because of autogynephilia now. So yeah, that's a hard one. And I remember even I think it was Ray Blanchard saying something like, sadly, there's probably going to be no research into autogynephilia for the next 20 years, as a result of what the trans lobby has done. So,
yeah, because it's transphobia.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Speaking of the trans lobby, OzPath. So that's the Australian wing of WPATH, the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. They came out with this this piece last week. It's in the Australian and New Zealand Journal of Psychiatry, and it's in response to the Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists position statement on gender dysphoria. So that's, I'm going to just call them RANDS CP. Their position statement is, cautious. They talk about the need to do a thorough assessment before putting anyone on hormones or anything like that. And man, it is just trans activist bullshit all the way through, and up to including that surgery regret rate is only 0.5%. And that was from trans people who were followed between 1972 and 2015.
Oh,
Like that, they're just, it's really ugly stuff.
That's people who did exactly what the psychiatrists are recommending, which was watchful waiting, and then, a process before. Like my friend who it took 10 years for her to be approved to have the surgery.
There you go. Yeah.
10 years and no regrets now.
And there wasn't ROGD going on at the time.
No.
They're just like these WPATH, OzPath, all the ones they've created around the world. The comparison is if people with schizophrenia got together and said, actually, schizophrenia isn't a mental illness, and we don't want it to be called schizophrenia anymore. We want it to be called atypical consciousness. It's not a pathology. It's not a medical condition. People who have atypical consciousness don't need medication. That's what OzPath is for people with gender dysphoria. That's what WPATH is.
Yeah,
it's insane. This is a mental illness. To want to do that to your body in the first place is a mental illness.
It's a trauma response. It's no different to anorexia and all those other issues, cutting or any of the rest of it. I mean, it's funny when, they have those people that have those extreme body modifications, and everyone's like, oh my God, how did they let them put the horns in there or get the forked tongue? And everyone's freaking out. But change, a child into the opposite sex, stunning and brave. I mean, it's madness.
Mate. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up, but we'll end on a funny note. Someone sent me this article, which was about cis women should smell their own shit in solidarity with trans women, because trans women who, if they use a bit of their colon to create their neo vagina, then it ends up smelling a little bit like shit. So all cis women should be smelling their own shit for the full month of Pride Month in solidarity with trans women, and to be able to empathize with them. It was so ridiculous.
People, things like that are on Twitter all the time, and people trivialize Twitter, but I have so many people tell me I peaked trans because I was on Twitter, and people seriously say that stuff in all seriousness and tweet it out, and it'll get thousands and thousands of likes.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. Ew.
All right. Well, good to see you again, Ange.
Yes, and you and everybody out there.
Thank you to all our subscribers.
Like and subscribe, please.
That's the one. And share. And we'll see you again next week. Bye.
See ya.